There comes a moment when exhaustion is no longer physical. It becomes spiritual, not because she stopped believing, but because she never stopped striving. She was tired, but she kept going, worn down, but still pushing, longing for rest, yet afraid of what would surface if she ever truly slowed down. Rest felt irresponsible, dangerous, unearned. Somewhere along the way, she learned that stopping meant falling behind, that slowing down meant losing control, that rest was something you took after everything was finished. But everything was never finished. There was always more to carry, more to fix, more to hold together, more to prove, more to survive. And so she resisted rest not because she didn't want peace, but because she didn't know how to receive it without guilt. Her body asked for rest. Her mind begged for rest. Her soul cried out for rest. But her heart had learned to equate rest with weakness, with failure, with giving up. And yet, this was never how God designed her to live. God did not create his daughters to be endlessly productive and quietly empty. He did not call them to exhaustion. He called them to trust. Come to me, he said. Not when everything is done, not when you are strong enough, not when you deserve it. Come to me, and I will give you rest. But rest requires surrender. And surrender means admitting that she was never meant to carry life alone. The moment she stopped resisting rest was not the moment she quit. It was the moment she finally listened to her limits, listened to her soul, listened to the quiet invitation of God that had been present all along. She didn't stop because she was weak. She stopped because she was wise enough to recognize that rest was not the enemy of faith. It was the fruit of it. If you've ever felt guilty for being tired, if you feared slowing down, if rest has felt like something you had to earn, stay. This message is for the woman who is finally learning that rest is not something to resist, but something to receive. And if these words already feel like permission your heart has been waiting for, consider subscribing, not for the channel, but so your soul always has a place to return. When God gently whispers, rest now, now. Let's walk through what happens when she stops resisting rest. Rest did not feel natural to her. It felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable, almost threatening. She had learned to move through life by staying alert, always prepared, always available, always holding herself together. Rest felt like letting her guard down, and letting her guard down felt unsafe. Somewhere along the way, she learned that being needed was the same as being valuable, that being busy meant being faithful, that exhaustion was simply the cost of being responsible. So when God invited her to rest, her heart hesitated, because rest required trust, and trust meant believing that things would not fall apart if she stopped holding everything together. She feared what rest would reveal, the emotions she had postponed, the grief she had never processed, the questions she never allowed herself to ask, the weariness she hid behind strength. Movement kept those things quiet. Busyness kept them buried. And so she resisted rest. Not because she didn't need it, but because she feared what would surface in the stillness. She feared that stopping would expose how tired she truly was. She feared that slowing down would make her look weak. She feared that resting would mean she had failed somehow. But God saw the truth beneath her fear. He saw a daughter who had mistaken striving for faithfulness. He saw a heart that loved deeply, but carried too much. He saw a soul that wasn't rebellious. It was exhausted. God was not disappointed by her resistance to rest. He was patient with it because he understood. that rest challenges the illusion of control. It asks a woman to believe that God works even when she stops, that He sustains even when she pauses, that He carries what she lays down. And so, her journey toward rest did not begin with peace. It began with fear. Fear of slowing down, fear of being still, fear of trusting that God would be enough, even when she was not constantly doing. But God does not force rest. He invites it. He waits. He calls gently. He reassures slowly. And little by little, she began to realize that rest was not the absence of responsibility. It was the presence of God. She was not being asked to abandon her life. She was being asked to stop living it alone. Her resistance to rest was not a flaw. It was a sign of how long she had been surviving instead of being held. And the moment she began to see rest, not as a threat, but as a gift, her heart started to soften, because deep down, her soul already knew the truth. Rest was not what she was running from. It was what she had been longing for all along. Resisting rest was never about laziness. It was about control. Deep inside, she believed that if she stayed alert, if she stayed busy, if she stayed strong, then nothing would fall apart. Rest felt like releasing the wheel, and releasing the wheel felt terrifying. Because control had become her shield, it protected her from disappointment, from uncertainty, from the pain of unanswered prayers, from the fear of things going wrong when she wasn't watching closely. She told herself she trusted God, and she did, but only up to a point. She trusted Him with the things she could still manage. She trusted Him with the parts of life that didn't feel too risky. What she struggled to trust Him with were the fragile places, the unresolved fears, the outcomes she couldn't predict, the moments where doing nothing felt more frightening than doing everything. Rest required her to confront a hard truth. She had been equating control with safety, and God was gently inviting her to see that safety had never come from control. It came from Him. This inner battle played out quietly. She would sit down to rest, only to feel guilt rise in her chest. She would slow her pace, only to hear an inner voice whisper, "You should be doing more." She would pause, only to feel anxiety tighten its grip. Her mind resisted rest, even when her body needed it. But God was patient. He didn't demand surrender. He didn't force stillness. He allowed her to wrestle, because wrestling is often how faith deepens. Little by little, He began showing her the cost of control. Control kept her tense. Control kept her anxious. Control kept her tired. Control kept her from experiencing the peace she prayed for. And then God began revealing another truth, one that slowly softened her resistance. Control had never protected her from pain. It had only postponed it. The more tightly she held on, the more exhausted she became. The more she tried to manage everything, the heavier life felt. Rest was not asking her to abandon responsibility. It was asking her to release the illusion that everything depended on her. Trust, she realized, was not passive. It was active surrender. It was choosing to believe that God is working, even when she pauses, that He is present, even when she is still, that He is faithful, even when she lets go. And slowly, her grip began to loosen. Not all at once, not perfectly, but sincerely. She began to understand that rest was not giving up control. It was placing control into hands far more capable than hers. And in that realization, something shifted. Her resistance softened, her breathing slowed, her heart leaned just a little toward trust, because she was beginning to see that rest was not the enemy of faith. It was the doorway to it. There came a moment, not dramatic, not loud, when she realized something essential. She was tired of carrying everything alone, not just responsibilities, but expectations, not just tasks, but fears, not just problems, but the pressure of always being okay. And for the first time, she didn't try to fix that feeling. She let it exist. She sat with the exhaustion instead of running from it. She acknowledged the limits she had spent years ignoring. She admitted quietly, honestly, that she had reached the edge of what her strength could sustain. This was not failure. This was clarity. And in that clarity, she did something holy. She stopped carrying what she was never meant to hold. She didn't present God with a polished version of herself. She didn't organize her prayers into neat requests. She didn't explain or justify her weariness. She simply came, with heaviness in her chest, with tension in her body, with thoughts that felt tangled and unsure, with a heart that no longer had the energy to pretend, and God met her there, not with correction, not with urgency, not with disappointment, but with steadiness. A steadiness that didn't rush her, a presence that didn't demand answers, a nearness that made space for everything she was holding as she allowed God to carry what she couldn't. She felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not relief because everything was solved, but relief because she was no longer alone in the weight of it. Her shoulders softened, her breathing slowed, her mind quieted. Not completely, but enough to rest. This is the exchange rest requires. Not perfection, not certainty, but surrender. Surrender that says, I don't know how to fix this. Surrender that admits, I can't hold this anymore. Surrender that trusts that God is capable, even when she feels fragile. She realized, then, that rest was not about escaping life. It was about sharing it, sharing the load, sharing the responsibility, sharing the outcome, letting God be God. And as she allowed him to carry the things she had been gripping so tightly, she noticed something else. She didn't disappear. She didn't lose herself. She didn't fall apart. She felt supported, held, grounded in a strength that wasn't her own. This was the moment. Rest stopped being an idea and became an experience. Because rest is not the absence of weight. It is the presence of God, carrying it with you. As she stopped resisting rest, she began to understand something new. Rest was not withdrawal, it was worship. It was not avoidance, it was obedience. She had spent so long believing that faith meant effort, that devotion meant depletion, that loving God meant always doing more. But rest asked her to believe differently. Rest asked her to trust that God was still working when she was still, that he was still present when she was quiet, that he was still faithful when she paused. At first, rest felt unnatural. She worried she was falling behind. She wondered if she was being irresponsible. She feared that stopping would somehow undo everything she had built. But rest did not undo her life. It reordered it. She began to notice that when she rested, her prayers deepened, her thoughts softened, her reactions slowed. Her heart felt less guarded. She wasn't becoming passive. She was becoming present. Rest made space for God to speak without competition, for scripture to settle, not rush, for peace to arrive without explanation. She realized that resisting rest had kept her busy. But resting made her attentive, and in that attentiveness she started hearing God again, not in dramatic words but in steady truths. You are not behind. You do not need to prove yourself. You are safe with me. You are allowed to rest. Her rest became a declaration that God was enough, that she did not need to earn peace, that she did not need to outrun fear, that she did not need to hold the world together. She laid down striving, she laid down urgency, she laid down the belief that exhaustion was holy. And what replaced it was not laziness. It was alignment. Her life began to move at a pace her soul could sustain. Her faith matured, not louder, but deeper, not frantic, but anchored. She learned that rest is where trust grows roots. Because when she stopped resisting rest, she didn't lose momentum. She gained clarity. She didn't lose purpose. She rediscovered it. She didn't lose faith. She learned to live it. In the end, her life did not change because she did more. It changed because she rested, not a shallow rest, not escape, not avoidance, but the kind of rest that says, God, I trust you enough to stop. She learned that rest was never a reward for finishing everything. It was an invitation to stop carrying everything. God had been offering it all along, not as a luxury, but as a necessity, not as weakness, but as wisdom. When she stopped resisting rest, she stopped resisting grace. She allowed herself to be held, to be guided, to be restored. And in that rest, she discovered something sacred. God was not asking her to be endlessly strong. He was asking her to be His. If this message spoke to you, if you've been tired but afraid to stop, faithful but exhausted, loving God but resisting rest, then let this be your permission, not to quit, but to rest. And if you want a place to return to, when your soul needs stillness, truth, and gentle reminders of God's presence, consider subscribing, not for the channel, but for your journey. Because rest is not something you have to earn. It is something you are invited to receive.